CWWER. I think this is also affiliated with the Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, COSH. But it looks like this. We're just gonna go over it. So a lot of the stuff about the rights that you have when you're the employee of a business don't apply in the same way to a cooperative, where the people that are employed by the business and have rights as employees of the business are also the people that have equal power in setting the policies and deciding on how grievances are settled inside of the co-op. But you still have to be very careful that the guidelines that you set not only meet the legal responsibilities, but also take care of your workers in a holistic way. So what are some rights that people have when they work in a business in terms of safety and health? Breaks. That's a good one. So you get legal limits for breaks.
If you're under 18, there are a lot of OSHA laws around, like, there's a lot of different safety things, but like one for us in the agricultural field is like heavy duty machinery. So like we have a weed whacker and you can't have people under 18 using it.
Yeah, this stuff that TSB has run into too. And I think there's 2 age limits. So there's 14, 15, and then 16, 17 has separate laws as well.
And for the 14, 15, and the 16, 17, it's not a safety law, but well, it's kind of a safety law. But there's a lot of laws around how late you can work at night and how many hours you can work on weekdays and versus school nights. I think it's you can't work past 10 o'clock on a school night, and you can't work alone.
And you legally can work less during the school year than you can during the summer. Anybody else?
You have a right to training and equipment that's been like kind of approved by OSHA for different industry standards. So like in some industries, like you have a right to have safety goggles and safety gloves and stuff like that. And then training around like if you're going to be working in contained spaces, or you have a right to demand or request training on those things.
So in terms of operating farm equipment or operating heavy landscaping equipment, if it happens, really being intentional about having training at the beginning, because not only that, you're legally responsible for providing training. If there's certain kinds of machinery, I also think, okay, so you have some criteria here for what you require for special training for, and that includes working with machines, working with chemicals, working in high places, working with human blood and human fluids, and doing work in holes or trenches that are more than 4 feet deep. So if you're doing any kind of construction work like that, you need to have separate safety training set up that you can look up on OSHA's website. I think they must have resources about what constitutes a valid training on those workplace safety hazards. What other rights do you have when you work in a cooperative or in another kind of business?
Right, not to be rash.
Right. How about ones related to occupational health and safety? What happens if you get hurt on the job? You get workers' comp, right? So you have a right to not have to use your own insurance. You have the right to use the employer's insurance as part of that. You can also have the right to refuse work that isn't safe. So even inside of cooperative, like especially if you have separation between managers and workers, which some co-ops have, maybe not any of the co-ops here, but in those cases you have to be very careful that the rights of the workers are respected, even if especially if there's power differences within the cooperative, in the day-to-day running of it, even if you're all full members at the end of the day.
So would that apply to, think of an instance where you're being exposed to hazardous materials and they haven't provided you with the proper safety equipment.
Right.
So then you can refuse to do that job, or until they provide it to you, or
you can refuse to do any job that you think is unsafe. You can demonstrate later that it's unsafe, and you can't legally fire somebody for doing a job.
Well, they would legally have to have material safety sheets
right
on hand anyway, so they would know that their asses.
Exactly.
So other, like, if I were down in an accident and the manager asked me for the bathroom, and I was like, I'm not comfortable going to the bathroom,
I don't know, that's a gray area. I don't know, that's a good question.
Kind of avoid putting that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that constitutes a safety hazard or if that constitutes.
What did you say?
I was like, is that a real scenario?
My cousin did that.
Yeah.
And the lady, she got fired, but not for that, but it was like some sort of
Yeah.
conflict.
I think that's worth talking to an employment lawyer about.
Yeah. The other,
I can tell you.
so there's a list of reasons why you can't fire people. So you can't fire people for refusing to do a job that's dangerous. You can't fire somebody for reporting safety problems at work. So if somebody talks directly to OSHA so OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, and you can't fire somebody for going directly to OSHA no matter whether you work in a cooperative or not. You also can't fire somebody for working with other co-workers to petition for safer, healthier workspaces. So even if it's not a direct safety hazard, if you're organizing, and obviously unions, this goes back to like the union cooperative relationship, but if you're working with unions, that provides the clearest protection. But in any instance where you're organizing with people to improve work standards, then you have like rights to protect you. If you get fired, you have the right to be rehired. If you petition within 30 days, this kind of stuff. That almost never works that way in practice. But knowing about your rights is at least a way that you can hold up, and it should work that way in practice in cooperatives where you actually have that direct connection between the people that are, actually working and feeling the brunt of lapses in safety regulations and policies, and the people that are actually making those policies. We go quick because we're running short on time, but if you get hurt on the job, you have the right to, after 7 days, getting paid workers' comp. I think that's something like 60% of wages lost when you're in Massachusetts, something like that. And
Just a note about Rhode Island, for the Rhode Island folks, that in Rhode Island you have a right to workers' comp, but the last time I checked, if you work for a company that for whatever reason illegally didn't have workers' compensation, you have a right to workers' comp, but there's no like state uninsured workers fund. Like they set one up, but it hasn't started working yet. So we might want to keep checking into that, because as of right now, if you work for a company that didn't have workers' comp, you're kind of screwed.
Also, two things that I don't come up for like youth working a lot, but also adults, is know your rights around breaks and shift time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm exactly right on this, but I'm pretty sure that the Massachusetts law is that you can't be scheduled for shifts of less than 3 hours.
Really?
Which, yeah, somebody should check it, but there are like minimum shift times, so you can be asking people to come in for a short shift.
Right.
But also around the 30-minute break, I think it's like if you work more than 6 hours,
Yeah.
you're guaranteed an unpaid 30-minute break. But then a lot of employees, like, it's not being clear to them, so they're getting a half hour deducted from their paycheck for breaks that they aren't necessarily taking.
Yeah.
Or, or they're taking a full hour break and then giving up the pay for all of that.
Right.
Different stuff. So just like knowing your rights around shift times and breaks is really important.
And especially, it's different for, working times is different for people under 18, so people are 16, 17. When I used to work at KFC, they didn't give me breaks. I worked 8 hours. And they literally give me no break.
Really?
Yeah.
I think that's.
And then my dad, and it was, they have to, they take it out automatically as if you took a
Right.
break.
Yeah.
Wow, where was that?
Huh?
Where?
KFC.
Yeah.
It's really common though, or I've heard it being really common with teenagers, minimum wage
Right.
jobs, where no one is telling them
Right.
that they have this right to half hour break, and then it's just like, oh, you relinquished your break by not taking it, but no one,
Right.
you didn't know that you had the option
Yeah.
to clock out.
The minimum shift thing, they can schedule for less than 3 hours, but they have to pay you for 3 hours, no matter how long you work.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Is that
I didn't know
everyone or
any.
Massachusetts?
Yeah.
I think it's Massachusetts,
Yeah,
I'm not totally sure.
that doesn't sound familiar in Rhode Island, but
I
I
just
just look into that.
Yeah, they used to have a
Sure, we're
2:30 to
gonna
5
listen to
shift when I was in high school, and they had to get rid of it.
That's true for part-time employees? Anywhere?
It's for everyone,
Wow.
as long as you're on the boat staff. It doesn't matter if you work for 10 minutes or whatever, they have to pay you for the whole 3 hours.
Good to know. So we don't have time to break up into groups right now, but I want people to maybe take this as homework to think about a list of the biggest occupational safety hazards in their industry and look around what trainings are standard for the industry that they're in and what common policies other groups have instituted to prevent those and preempt them. And I'd like to, if we have more information about stuff like minimum shift time, the differences between Rhode Island and Massachusetts, that'd be good too. Pass it back to you.
Yeah, can I clarify one thing about the, about employment law and cooperatives? If you are an employee of a worker-owned co-op, you are still subject to employment laws. The only time you would not be subject to employment laws is if you are, usually it's a business that's set up as an LLC. If you are a member of an LLC and you're not considered an employee of that LLC, but you only get compensated by like taking a draw out of the business. So you don't get an hourly wage, you don't get a salary, you don't get any kind of regular compensation like that, but you only like take cash out of the company if the company has it to give you. That's the only time you're not really subject to employment law. And in Massachusetts, probably not in Rhode Island, but in Massachusetts they're really strict about labor laws. So if you are working as like an independent contractor, but you really should be classified as an employee, you are also going to be subject to employment laws. So I would say like most people here are probably going to be considered employees and subject to employment laws, and you should probably assume that you are.
That's true in Rhode Island too, but you have to really, like workers should also always know to always mark your own hours, always mark your own breaks, like try to keep track of all that, because if they're paying you as a contractor, later with that record you could show to them the money and the overtime that you're actually owed, because they should have been paying you as an employee.
Right.
But sometimes it's hard to press in Rhode Island courts because they're not hip to that.
Okay. Yeah, really good point. Always track your own time, even if you're.
And partnerships
employer's not
are
working
similar
for
to that too, right? Similar to LLCs in that
Right.
they might not be subject to employment
You might
laws
not
the same
be.
way.
Yeah.
But
But if you're
to be
getting a
safe,
paycheck,
if you're getting a
definitely if
paycheck.
you're getting taxes if you're getting a paycheck that have taxes taken out, you are absolutely an employee and you're always subject to employment law. And if you're, and if you should be treated as an employee, you probably are also an employee. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back and hit a couple more topics. Okay? Have some salad?